Before filming this video, I must give a big shout out to IFL TV because this is actually the second video on a bounce that I'm filming off the back of one of their interviews. This specific video relates to Eddie Hearn's interview that was filmed yesterday by IFL TV, so check that out if you're interested. But in that video, Eddie Hearn discussed opponents for Anthony Joshua on April the 9th, and I wanted to make a video of that and looking at the names he brought up. Eddie Hearn says Derek Chisora is a possibility, but we're looking at 8 or 9 other opponents. And I'm going to give you the list of names that was mentioned in that video. Johan Depar, Derek Chisora, Brian Jennings, Stiverne, Tony Thompson, Antonio Tarver, Steve Cunningham, Joseph Parker. We also know about Carlos Takam, because Carlos Takam and Anthony Joshua are IBF ranked. They're going to be the top 2 IBF ranked fighters because Erkan Tepe is ruled out due to his drug ban. So those are the names in the mix. Chisora, Depar, Jennings, Stiverne, Thompson, Tarver, Cunningham, Takam and Parker. Maybe not Parker. We'll come to that in a minute anyway. Now, what Eddie Hearn said is Thompson, Tarver, Cunningham, he's seeing those guys as kind of unlikely. The names that he was really looking at were Depar, Chisora, Jennings, Stiverne, and I believe Takam. Now, let's just handle the Joseph Parker issue briefly. A lot of people want to see this fight. They're probably the 2 most hyped prospects in world boxing, heavyweight world boxing. So I understand why people want to see that fight. I want to see the fight. Let's be honest though, it's not the right time for that fight. You know, these are 2 guys with superstardom ahead of them. They should both build themselves up, have some real big fights, announce themselves on the world scene, and have that fight in 2018, 2019 with world titles on the line. You know, they're both youngsters. They both have a lot of learning fights ahead of them. Not the right time for that fight whatsoever. Its commercial appeal isn't there to the same extent it will be in 2 or 3 years' time. And to be honest, neither of them have faced the quality of opposition just yet. You know, I'd like to see them both establish themselves against top 10 opponents before we even consider that fight. And Eddie Hearn, to be fair to him, said something similar. He said it's a fight that will definitely happen if both guys keep winning, but he hasn't been overly impressed with Joseph Parker's level of opposition. Now, arguably, that's quite cheeky given Anthony Joshua's level of opposition. You could say that Dillian Whyte and Cali Meehan, which are the best wins for both men, are at similar level. But regardless, you know, Joseph Parker probably does need to face slightly better opposition in general. I mean, there is a point there, which I've discussed on this channel previously. Anyway, let's put that to a side. We're left with 5 names: Depar, Chisora, Jennings, Stiverne and Takam. Now, Johan Depar was looking the most likely a fortnight ago. You know, there's a lot of press to say that the Depar fight was going to be made. I really like that fight. Depar gave Wilder a real test, went 11 rounds with Wilder. Wouldn't be a threat to beat Anthony Joshua. For me, he doesn't have the skill, the power to beat Anthony Joshua, but would have been a good learning fight and would have been a step up as well in terms of proven capability. Depar went the distance with Erkan Tepe. Depar went 11 with Deontay Wilder. He'd have been a good test to give Anthony Joshua rounds. I really like the Johan Depar fight as a learning fight for Joshua. However, I acknowledge that it's not necessarily a fight to announce himself on the world scene, and it's not a fight that's going to do mega pay-per-view numbers. You know, Johan Depar is not a well-known boxer amongst British boxing fans, and I think this is one of the problems with having built Anthony Joshua into this mega pay-per-view star already, is once he's in that position, you can't necessarily go back. And Johan Depar would be a big step back, certainly in terms of pay-per-view sales. You know, there's no way they'd do 50% of the numbers they did with Dillian Whyte against Johan Depar. So, there you go. That fight now seems less likely to happen, as Johan Depar, I understand, has a fight coming up in Monte Carlo, or Monaco, with Nascimento, Marcelo Nascimento, that kind of well-known journeyman type. So, you know, that fight seems less likely. I doubt Johan Depar would take another fight in between if, you know, he was going to be in a big fight with Anthony Joshua on April the 9th. So, Whilst I like the Depar fight, I think we can safely rule that one out. The Derek Chisora fight, I also quite like. You know, I think Derek Chisora has the most pay-per-view appeal in the UK amongst boxing fans. Now, I'm not saying I believe Chisora Joshua should necessarily be a pay-per-view fight, but let's be honest, Chisora is a very big name in the British boxing scene. We know he's fought Klitschko, Fury, Hay. He's been involved in that brawl with Hay, that spitting incident, you know, the glassing incident. You know, Chisora is a well-known name, and he's a character. And I think British boxing fans, maybe more the casual market than the hardcore fan, would buy into that. And I also like it as a fight. I think it's a good stylistic matchup. You know, and it would be for the European title. Obviously, they're both highly ranked. Hellenius has vacated, and you know, that would be a good progression for AJ. You know, British title, Commonwealth title, Euro title. I'd like that as a fight, actually, and that's obviously one that's still a possibility. Now, the other names, interesting: Jennings, Stiverne, and Takam. We'll handle these three in one to begin with. All three of these guys are thereabout top 10. I think in my actual top 10 I had Jennings and Takam top 10 and Bermain Stiverne top 11. Now, if Joshua was to go out and do a number on these three blokes, or any one of these three, I would legitimately call Anthony Joshua a top 10 fighter. But let me say, any one of those names is a massive step up. Jennings, Stiverne, Takam, they're all beatable. They've actually all lost at the top level, haven't they? Jennings has lost to Ortiz, Klitschko. Stiverne has lost to Wilder. I know he had the loss earlier on. Takam lost to Alexander Povetkin, drew with Mike Perez. You know, they're all beatable at the top level, but they're real solid top 10 fighters. And all of them are quite durable guys as well. They're not easy one-round knockout jobs whatsoever. Now, as I say, those three fights are a huge step up. You know, Dillian Whyte's a good fighter, but Dillian Whyte is a sort of prospect level fighter who was slightly raw and poorly conditioned in his fight with Anthony Joshua. These three are legitimate top 10 guys, all of whom have fought someone and competed at top 5 level, you know, within heavyweight boxing. It would be a truly massive step up. Now, if I was managing Anthony Joshua personally, I would probably look at all 5 of these fights. But I would have them Johan Depar or Marius Wok, that type of opponent. Derek Chisora as a summer fight. And then maybe I'd look at, I don't know, Stiverne, Jennings, Takam. I'd build him up slowly. Joshua's still a novice. How many fights he had? 14 fights, 15 fights, 16 fights? And let's be honest, Joshua, whilst he's a very good prospect, there's a lot to work on his game. A lot of flaws were exposed, not exposed, but shown up in that Dillian Whyte fight. And that's understandable. 15 fight novices do show up flaws in early fights because they're not the most experienced schooled operators. They're not 40 fight veterans, so you expect to see an element of greenness to their game. But I just wonder now, you know, a lot of the rumours today are that the Carlos Takam fight is the one that's going to be made. Because, you know, with the Erkan Tepe situation, this can be for the IBF mandatory. And it would effectively act as a final eliminator for Charles Martin's belt. So you could essentially get to be a world title by beating Carlos Takam and Charles Martin, which I guess is viewed as a very easy route to a world title. Which is clearly Anthony Joshua's game, is to get to a world title. So a lot of the rumours are that Carlos Takam will be his next fight. But I have real concerns about Joshua's future if he fights Carlos Takam in his 15th, 16th fight, and then fights Charles Martin in his 16th, 17th fight, and is then a world champion after 17 fights. Now, I admit, even though I'm not the most sold on Joshua, he probably would start as a favourite against both Carlos Takam and Charles Martin at this stage. But would it actually be in his long-term interest to be world champion? Because then there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide from mandatories. There's nowhere to hide from the big unification matchups. And I just wonder, and I've said this time and time again, is the pay-per-view model meaning that we're rushing Anthony Joshua too quickly? Because now every fight's going to have to be pay-per-view. And Eddie Hearn is too scared that putting in an opponent like Marius Wok or Johan de Paar will have too much of a negative effect on the numbers. You know, let's not forget, Joshua still hasn't been beyond 7 rounds. And the only time he went beyond 4 rounds, he looked like he had severe stamina issues in my mind. I just think this could be too much too soon. And I'm not even saying he gets found out by Takam. I'm not even saying he gets found out by Charles Martin. There's a possibility he does, but I don't, you know, he'd be a favourite on those occasions. But do we risk having a world champion who just hasn't had the experience necessary to get to those big fights? Would it not be better to take the foot off the gas slightly here? Get him to fight a Johan de Paar or a Marius Wok. Then build to a Chisora fight in the summer. Maybe take up a main Stiverne at the end of the year. You know, guys like Stiverne, Jennings. If Anthony Joshua hasn't really ironed out any clicks in his game, that's the level where you could get found out. That is like, you know, Dillian Whyte is a good fighter. I don't want to say Dillian Whyte's not a good fighter, but he's not a top 30 heavyweight. He's not a top 40 heavyweight. Who are the best people Dillian Whyte's actually beaten on his resume? You know. And to go straight into a fight like that, where you put in a respectable but at times unconvincing performance, straight into a guy like Brian Jennings, you know, that is a risk. That is a risk. That is like what happened to David Price when he was fighting the Sam Sextons and McDermotts of this world and then got chucked straight into top 10 level. That is a real risk. And I just think Anthony Joshua might be too early to start moving him in the world title direction just yet. Guys like Brian Jennings have the potential to test your stamina for 12 rounds. Guys like Bermain Stiverne have the potential to knock you out. You know, they have one-punch knockout power. I'm not saying either of those are unbeatable fighters, and I'm not saying I'd even pick them to beat Joshua, but I just wonder if it's too much too soon. I hope for Joshua's sake the next fight is de Paar or Chisora. If it's Jennings, Stiverne or Takam, I'm not saying I'll pick him to lose, but what I am saying is that I think it's going to put him in a position where he's going to take a loss in the near future. Because there won't be any going back at that stage. And he'll essentially be operating at just below world title level, final eliminator level, while still a novice and while still with obvious cracks in his game. He still hasn't had the learning fights. He still hasn't had the tough 12-round fight against the KG veteran. You know, that's what we need now. And that's what's going to turn Anthony Joshua into the next great heavyweight. You know, when Tyson Fury got to fight Vladimir Klitschko, we knew he could do 12 rounds. We knew he could get hurt in a fight, get back up and knock his opponent out. We knew he had experienced several different styles, you know. Guys who like to